I spent 12 years as a decorated Special Forces operative, the man they called Silent Death. I was trained to break people, extract information, disappear without a trace. But the one thing I couldn't see coming was that my own wife would betray me with a cartel lieutenant, and I'd lose custody of my daughter because of it. Today, I'm a janitor pushing a mop. But they made a massive mistake underestimating me. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. I clean floors for a living now. That's what people see. Mason, the quiet guy with the mop. The one who empties trash cans at 6 a.m. before anyone else arrives. They don't see the person I used to be. They don't notice the scars on my hands. They definitely don't know that in my old life, I had a code name that made certain people lose sleep at night. 12 years. That's how long I gave to the military. 12 years of waking up in countries I can't name, doing things I still can't talk about. My hands learned things that no hands should learn. My mind saw things that never leave you. And when it was finally over, when I decided I'd given enough of myself to that machine, I walked away. I wanted a normal life. A quiet life. A life where the most dangerous thing I did was worry about mortgage payments and school events. That's when I met Violet. She was at a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting there, reading a newspaper like a regular person, trying to train myself to think about normal things, traffic, weather, my neighbor's dog. And then she laughed. It was this easy, genuine laugh. Not forced. Not calculated. She was with a friend, talking about something stupid, and her whole face lit up. I remember thinking, this is what normal people look like when they're happy. 2 weeks later, we started talking. 6 months later, we were engaged. 3 years after that, we had a daughter named Harper. She was perfect. This tiny human with her mother's laugh and these big, curious eyes that looked at me like I was her whole world. I became a janitor because it was the safest job I could find. No security clearances. No background checks that would dig too deep. No questions about my past. I was good with my hands. Good at being invisible. Good at noticing things people left behind. The corporate building I worked at was quiet and clean. The money was enough. Violet said she understood why I needed work that was simple, work that didn't come home with me emotionally. She said she respected my choice to step away from my old life. She said a lot of things. I found out the truth 6 months ago. I was cleaning the executive floor on a Wednesday evening. This was after everyone had left for the day. I noticed Violet's car in the parking garage when I arrived. That was odd. She usually picked Harper up from school and took her to her mother's house on Wednesdays. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she'd forgotten something at the office where she worked in human resources upstairs. I went to the break room to refill my water bottle, and I heard voices coming from one of the private conference rooms. The door was slightly open. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was just walking past, but then I heard my wife's voice. And then a man's voice. Laughing. Low and intimate. I stopped. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. Old instincts kicked in. Years of training taught me how to observe without being observed. What I heard in that room destroyed something in me that I didn't know still needed to be alive. She was with a man named Julian. He worked in finance on the 3rd floor. I'd seen him around. Tall, confident, the kind of guy who wore expensive watches and talked too loud in elevators. But what I didn't know then was that Julian wasn't just some corporate climber. He was the right-hand man to a cartel operator named Adrian who'd been using the building for money laundering operations for the past 8 months. I found that out later. In that moment, I only knew that my wife was in a room with another man, and she was whispering things to him that made my stomach turn to stone. She was talking about how much she hated her life with me, how boring I was, how she'd made a mistake marrying a man who had no ambition, no edge, no real future. She said I was a ghost, that I moved through our life like I wasn't really there. She was right about that last part. I wasn't really there. Not all of me. Some part of me was still out there in the dark, still listening for threats, still ready for things to go wrong. But that wasn't an excuse for what she was doing. Julian asked her when she was going to tell me. I heard him say it clearly through the cracked door. And Violet laughed. That same laugh that made me fall in love with her at a coffee shop 3 years ago. And she said, "He's never going to know. He doesn't pay attention to anything unless it's a threat." The cruelty in that statement hit differently than any physical blow ever could. I walked away. I went back to my mop. I finished cleaning the 32nd floor like nothing had happened. I emptied every trash can, wiped every surface, made everything spotless. And I kept my hands steady the whole time, even though inside, something was breaking. That night, I went home. Violet was already there, playing with Harper on the living room floor, building something with blocks. She looked up at me and smiled like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't spent the evening with another man. Like she wasn't a completely different person than the one I thought I'd married. I asked her how her day was. "Normal," she said. "Boring. Just the same old office stuff." That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've been watching. I've been listening. I've been doing what I was trained to do, gathering intelligence, building a picture, understanding the full scope of what I was dealing with. Because I found out that Violet's affair wasn't just about passion or poor judgment. It was part of something bigger. Julian had brought her into the circle deliberately. She'd been feeding him information about my background, my past, things I'd told her in confidence during late-night conversations when I couldn't sleep and needed to tell someone I loved that the person I used to be still haunted me. She sold that information, not for money directly, but for attention, for the thrill of being someone other than a janitor's wife, for the promise that Adrian's organization could make her life exciting. And then came the day that changed everything. Adrian walked into the building for a surprise inspection of his money laundering operation. I was cleaning the hallway on the floor where his temporary office was set up. I was invisible, as always. He didn't even glance at me as he walked past. But as he passed, he stopped. He turned back. He looked at me with these cold, calculated eyes, and he smiled in a way that made my skin go cold. "Hey, janitor," he said. His voice was smooth, but edged with something dangerous. "What's your military rank?" I didn't answer immediately. I just kept sweeping. "I'm guessing private? Sergeant, maybe." He was playing with me, mocking me. He didn't expect an answer. He was just showing off, letting me know he was powerful enough to ask random people questions and not care about the response. "You know what? Doesn't matter. You probably never saw real combat anyway. You look like you've never broken a bone in your life." He laughed. His men laughed with him. I kept sweeping. But in that moment, as he walked away, I realized something crucial. Adrian didn't know who I was. Violet hadn't told him my name. She hadn't told him about my past. She'd only sold him fragments, pieces of information that sounded impressive but didn't connect to who I actually was. And that meant I had an advantage. I had time. That night, I kissed Harper goodnight and tucked her into bed. She asked me to read her a story. I sat on the edge of her mattress and read her something about a brave prince who saved people. She fell asleep with her hand on my arm. When I came downstairs, Violet was waiting for me. "We need to talk about something," she said. My blood went cold. "Adrian wants to meet you," she continued. "He wants to know more about your background. I told him you were interesting, that there's more to you than meets the eye." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I didn't recognize the woman sitting in front of me. "What did you tell him?" I asked quietly. "Just that you used to be in the military, that you keep things secret, that you might be useful to his organization." "Useful how?" She smiled. It was the same smile from the coffee shop, but now it meant something completely different. "He wants you to work for him, Mason. Real money, real power, the kind of life you said you didn't want anymore." I thought maybe you'd changed your mind, that maybe you'd realize that boring isn't sustainable forever. And if I say no? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I realized in that moment that my wife had just set me up. She'd dangled me in front of a cartel operator like bait. And now I was standing at a crossroads I didn't choose, facing a future I couldn't predict. But here's what Adrian didn't know. I'd survived 12 years of actual combat. I'd survived being shot at, blown up, tortured, interrogated, and hunted by people with real resources. I knew how to move in darkness. I knew how to survive. And I was about to remind everyone, including my wife, exactly who Mason really was. The meeting happened 3 days later at a restaurant I'd never been to before, the kind of place where Adrian owned half the staff. Violet insisted I wear something presentable, which meant a button-down shirt instead of my usual work clothes. She was nervous, checking her phone constantly, adjusting her hair in the car mirror. I said nothing. I just watched her hands shake. Adrian sat in a corner booth with Julian beside him and two other men I didn't recognize standing near the entrance. He didn't stand when we arrived, didn't offer his hand. He just smiled and gestured for us to sit. "Mason," he said, leaning back in his chair, "your wife speaks very highly of you. Says you're a man with a particular set of skills, ones you don't advertise." I didn't respond. I picked up the water glass in front of me and drank. "She tells me you were military. Special operations, maybe?" He was fishing. Violet had clearly told him fragments, but he wanted confirmation. Wanted to see if I'd fill in the gaps myself. That's what most people do. They talk too much when someone important is asking questions. They need the other person to respect them, so they reveal more than they should. "Long time ago," I said simply. Adrian exchanged a glance with Julian. I caught it. Julian looked at me differently now, not with the casual disrespect from the hallway, but with something closer to wariness. Violet had told him something that made her scared, and now he was wondering if I was actually dangerous. "Good. See, here's my situation," Adrian continued, ordering wine without asking anyone what they wanted. "I have a business, a growing business, and businesses need infrastructure. People you can trust, people who understand discretion, loyalty, and how to handle complications." "What kind of complications?" I asked. He smiled. "The kind that requires someone who's already comfortable with violence, with making difficult decisions quickly, with leaving no trace." Violet's hand touched my arm. A signal, a plea maybe. She was hoping I'd say yes, that this was my golden ticket out of a janitor's life. She didn't understand that I'd already had that golden ticket. I'd thrown it away deliberately. "I'm not interested," I said. The restaurant went quiet. Not completely silent. There were still other diners, still music playing. But at our table, the air thickened. Adrian set down his wine glass slowly, deliberately. "You haven't heard my offer yet. Don't need to. $500,000. First year. $500,000 to listen to what I need and decide if you want to be part of it." I stood up. "I'm done with that life. I'm done with being the person you think I am." "Sit down," Adrian said. Not aggressive, not even loud, just final. I sat down, but not because he ordered me to. I sat down because I needed to understand what was happening here. Why he was pushing so hard when someone saying no should have been enough to move on to the next option. "Your wife told me something interesting," he continued, leaning forward. "She said you have nightmares, that you wake up screaming sometimes, that there's a part of you that's still deployed, still out there in whatever dark place trained you." I looked at Violet. Her eyes were down, studying the menu like it contained the secrets of the universe. She said you can't turn it off, that no matter how normal you try to be, there's a current running underneath everything you do. A predator pretending to be a janitor. He paused. "I don't think you're pretending, Mason. I think you're just bored. I think your wife married someone she never really understood, and now you're both unhappy." He wasn't wrong. Not completely. But his version of my life was constructed from fragments Violet had given him, and fragments always paint an incomplete picture. "Here's what happens next," Adrian said, and now his tone shifted. The friendly businessman disappeared. What remained was colder, more transactional. "You can say no. You can keep pushing your mop around that building. Keep making 12 an hour. Keep watching your wife leave you because you're a ghost in her life. Keep being a man who could be something but chooses to be nothing. Or," I asked, "or you work for me. You become someone again. You provide a service I need. You make more money in 6 months than you've made in your entire life, and your wife gets to stop resenting you. She'll resent me whether I work for you or not." I said. Probably, he agreed. But at least you'll understand why. That hit different. Because the truth was lodged in there somewhere, wrapped around the threat like a knife hidden in a bouquet of flowers. Adrian understood something fundamental about men like me, that the weight of being ordinary was heavier than the weight of being dangerous. That sometimes a man would rather be feared than invisible. But I wasn't that man anymore. Or at least, I was trying not to be. I need time to think, I said. You have until Monday, Adrian replied. After that, we move forward whether you're part of it or not. And if you're not part of it, he let that sentence hang, unfinished, infinite in its implications. Julian walked us out. At the parking lot, he pulled me aside while Violet went to the car. You don't know what you're dealing with, he said quietly. Adrian doesn't accept rejection well. He's already decided you're either an asset or a problem. There's no third option. Is that a warning? I asked. It's a fact. And here's another one. Your wife came to me 6 weeks ago and said if I could get Adrian interested in you, she'd leave you and come with me. She wanted out of your life that badly. I didn't respond. I just got in the car and drove home in silence while Violet stared out the window, waiting for me to do something. To react. To become the man Adrian had described. That night, after she was asleep, I went to my office and opened a secure laptop I'd kept from my old life, one she didn't know existed. I started searching for everything Adrian Drackle had ever done. Every operation, every connection, every reputation marker in the underground world I'd left behind. And then I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to take Adrian's offer, not because I wanted to work for him, but because I needed to know exactly how dangerous he really was. And because the only way to survive this was to get inside his world first. By Monday, I knew every weakness he had, every fear, every move he'd made in the last 10 years. And I had a plan. I called Adrian on Monday morning from my cell phone. I'm in, I said. No explanation. No hesitation. Just commitment. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear him calculating, reassessing. Men like Adrian respect decisiveness. It's the one thing they understand instantly. Good choice, he finally said. Show up Thursday at the warehouse on 15th Street. Bring nothing. Tell your wife you're working extra shifts. I didn't tell Violet anything. I let her assume I'd capitulated, that I was finally becoming the man she'd been trying to transform me into. She stopped asking questions after Monday. She just smiled more often. Smiled like she'd won something. The warehouse was exactly what I expected. Industrial, isolated, accessible by only one main road. Adrian had chosen it specifically for that reason. Control the entrance, control the exit. It was good tactical thinking. It was also vulnerable in ways he hadn't considered. He was waiting for me with 4 men I didn't recognize and Julian standing in the background, watching. Adrian wore an expensive suit that didn't hide the shoulder holster underneath. He wasn't the type to trust security alone. Before we talk business, Adrian said, walking toward me, we need to establish a few things. 1. Everything you see here stays here. 2. Everyone here answers to me. 3. If you become a liability, you disappear. Completely. Your wife won't even find a body. I understand, I said. I don't think you do. He stopped a few feet away from me. See, I know your background now. I had people dig deeper after you accepted my offer. Special Forces operator. Decorated. Walked away 12 years ago. Since then, nothing. No criminal record. No whispers. No reputation. Which means either you're exceptionally good at being invisible, or you're exceptionally good at staying out of trouble. He was waiting for me to fill the silence. To explain myself. To prove I was worth the risk. I was good at my job, I said. That's why I stopped. Because I was exactly the thing they wanted me to be, and I realized I didn't want to be that thing anymore. Adrian nodded slowly. But something changed. Something made you come to me. My wife, I said. She was right. I've been pretending to be ordinary. It's exhausting. Being around you. Realizing there's actually something here. Purpose, stakes, real money. It reminded me what being alive actually feels like. It was a careful lie, constructed from just enough truth to be believable. I wasn't lying about the exhaustion. I wasn't lying about what I'd given up feeling alive. I was just packaging it in a way that made Adrian believe he'd won, that he'd cracked through the janitor disguise and found the operative underneath. "Come with me," he said. He walked me through the warehouse to a back room where a man was sitting in a chair with his hands bound. The man had been beaten recently. I could see the fresh bruises, the swelling around his right eye. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was just sitting there, accepting what was coming. "This is Dominic," Adrian explained. "He works for a rival organization. He's been skimming money from my operations for 6 months. I only just found out." I understood what Adrian was doing. This wasn't just a show of dominance. This was a test. He wanted to see if I would cross a line, if I would do something that would lock me into his world permanently, a crime serious enough that I could never leave, never testify against him, never escape. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "I want you to prove you're serious," Adrian said. "I want you to show me you're capable of more than sweeping floors. I want you to show me you're the man your wife said you were." Dominic looked up at me. His eyes were pleading. He knew what was about to happen. He was hoping I'd be merciful, hoping I'd end this quickly instead of prolonging it. I'd been in this position before, many times. I'd looked into the eyes of people who'd done terrible things, who'd hurt people I cared about, who'd made the conscious choice to become a problem that needed solving. And I'd always done what needed to be done. But this was different. This was Adrian setting the hook. This was the moment where I became complicit in his world, where I traded my freedom for a role in his organization. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and I started recording. Adrian didn't notice at first. By the time he realized what I was doing, I'd already captured everything: his face, his instruction, the setup of the room, the bound man. The moment he truly believed I was going to become his instrument. "What are you doing?" Adrian asked, his voice suddenly sharp. "Insurance," I said. "You want me to do something that makes me a criminal, that makes me belong to you. But I need insurance too. I need to know that if you ever decide I'm a liability, I have something that can destroy you." Adrian's hand moved toward his holster. "If anything happens to me," I continued, "copies of this video go to the FBI, local law enforcement, and every rival organization that would kill for this kind of leverage against you. You kill me, you're signing your own death warrant." The room went silent. Adrian's men had their hands on their weapons now, waiting for a signal. Adrian was studying me with new eyes, not as an asset anymore, but as an adversary, someone he'd underestimated. "You're walking a dangerous line," he said quietly. "I know, but I'm not becoming your slave. I'm becoming your partner. Real partners don't betray each other. Slaves always do the moment they see a way out." Adrian laughed. Actually laughed. "You know what? I like you. You came here pretending to be someone who'd given up on violence, and then you turned around and played me like an amateur. That takes guts." He gestured to his men to stand down. "Let him go," he said, indicating Dominic. "We have a new arrangement now." As Dominic was released and hurried out of the warehouse, Adrian turned back to me. "You just made this whole situation a lot more interesting, and a lot more dangerous, because now I have to wonder what else you're capable of." "Exactly," I said, "which is why you're going to tell me everything. Every operation, every weakness in your organization, every person you're connected to." "And why would I do that?" "Because if you don't, I disappear tomorrow. I give my recording to law enforcement, and you spend the next 20 years in federal prison. But if you do, I become the most valuable asset you've ever had. Someone smart enough to keep you alive, careful enough not to get caught, and dedicated enough to actually be worth the fortune you're about to pay me." Adrian studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Welcome to my organization, Mason. I have a feeling you're going to change everything." The first 2 weeks with Adrian's organization were about observation. I needed to understand his structure, his vulnerabilities, his connections. Every night, I came home with new information logged in my secure system: names, dates, locations, transaction patterns. The recording I'd made at the warehouse was safely backed up in 3 different places. Insurance, just like I'd promised. But something shifted the moment I walked through my front door on a Wednesday evening. Harper was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework when I arrived. She was 8 years old, with her mother's dark hair and a sharp mind that noticed everything. She looked up from her math worksheet and studied me like she was seeing someone she didn't recognize. "Dad, you're different," she said. "What do you mean, baby?" I asked, dropping my keys on the counter. "You smell different. You walk different. You're not you." Violet came down the stairs quickly. "Harper, that's not nice. Your father's just been working hard." But Harper wasn't wrong. I'd started moving like I used to, with purpose, with awareness of my surroundings, with the predatory grace that came from years of training. I'd been so focused on infiltrating Adrian's world that I hadn't realized I was leaving pieces of that infiltration at home. I made a mental note to adjust. Harper couldn't become suspicious. She couldn't start asking questions that Violet would feel compelled to answer. Over the next few weeks, Adrian introduced me to his operation more deeply. The money laundering happened through legitimate businesses, restaurants, gyms, real estate. The drugs moved through a distribution network I wasn't directly involved with. The real violence, the intimidation, the enforcement, that's where I came in. Adrian had a problem with a detective named Colin who was getting too close to his operations. Nothing specific yet, just asking questions, turning over rocks, building a case. Adrian wanted it handled quietly. "What does handled mean?" I asked. "It means he stops being a problem," Adrian said. "And it means you're the one who makes that happen." I could have killed him. That would have been clean, efficient, final. But that would have locked me completely into Adrian's world. It would have made me a murderer for hire, and Adrian would own me forever. Instead, I did something different. I found out that Detective Colin had a daughter at the same school as Harper. I found out his routine, his vulnerabilities, his weaknesses, and then I carefully leaked information to him. Not about Adrian's current operations, but about something bigger. Something that would make him redirect all his attention away from Adrian and toward a rival cartel that was actually moving into the city. Detective Colin's investigation shifted. Suddenly, he was too busy chasing a much larger target to worry about Adrian's money laundering. Adrian believed I'd threatened the detective or broken something in him. But really, I just repositioned the board. "That was beautiful," Adrian said when the detective officially dropped his investigation. "How did you do it?" I reminded him what really matters, I said. His daughter's safety, his career advancement, the chance to take down someone worse than me. Adrian saw this as loyalty. He didn't understand that it was the opposite. I was systematically neutralizing every threat around him while keeping my own hands clean. I was building a case against him that was independent of my actions, that wouldn't directly implicate me. But Violet was noticing things too. She started asking questions about where I was going, who I was meeting, why I was suddenly making so much money but couldn't explain how. She'd find cash in my desk drawer. Adrian paid me in increments, cash drops that made money tracing difficult. She'd see me studying maps of the city, marking locations that corresponded to Adrian's operations. One night, she confronted me. "What are you doing?" she asked. "You promised me you'd just take the job, that you'd work for Adrian and keep us safe. But this is something else, isn't it?" "I'm doing what I need to do," I said. "You're going to get us killed. You're going to get Harper killed." "No," I said. "I'm going to save her from the mess you created when you brought Adrian into our lives." She had no response to that. Because we both knew the truth. I was the only thing standing between Adrian's world and our daughter. If I hadn't infiltrated his organization, he would have owned us completely. He would have used Harper as leverage. He would have destroyed everything. But Violet didn't see it that way. She just saw a husband who was becoming more and more like the person she'd originally pushed him toward. Someone dangerous. Someone unpredictable. Someone she'd lost. That's when she made her next move. She called her lawyer and filed for custody. Claimed I was unstable, that my past was catching up with me, that I was becoming a danger to Harper. She presented evidence that I was working for a criminal organization, which was technically true, though she didn't know the full scope of what I was actually doing. The first I heard about it was when I got home and found an official document on the kitchen table. "I'm sorry," Violet said, "but I can't watch you destroy our lives. And I can't let Harper see what you're becoming." I read through the custody petition carefully, already calculating my next move. Violet had made a critical mistake. She'd forced the issue before I was ready, and that meant I had to accelerate my timeline. Adrian was going down, not because I wanted revenge, but because Violet had just guaranteed that if I didn't remove him from the equation, he would use the custody battle against me. He'd offer Violet money. He'd plant evidence. He'd make sure I lost Harper permanently. I looked at Violet across the kitchen table and realized something important. She'd already lost our daughter the moment she chose to work with Adrian. She just didn't know it yet. The plan was already forming in my mind. Sophisticated, multi-layered, the kind of operation that would require Adrian to trust me completely while I systematically disassembled everything he'd built. And it would all be done quietly, invisibly, just like I'd been trained to do. The custody battle was Adrian's gift to me, though he didn't realize it. Once the legal process started, everything became documented. Official records, court filings, statements under oath. I could use that framework to build something Adrian would never see coming. I began working deeper inside his organization. Adrian trusted me now, trusted me enough to show me his financial structures, his safe house locations, his contact list. He thought I was building loyalty. I was building a blueprint. Over 6 weeks, I systematically identified every weak point in his operation. The accountant in Miami who laundered money through shell corporations. The warehouse manager in Chicago who moved product for distribution networks. The corrupt police captain in our city who took monthly payments for protection. Each one was a thread, and I was learning how to pull them. But I needed help. Officially help. I contacted an old friend from my military days, someone I knew had connections to federal law enforcement. We met at a parking garage late at night, the kind of meeting that left no paper trail. "I need immunity," I told him. "Full immunity for everything I've done in the last 6 weeks. And I need it before I hand over what I have." "That's not how this works," he said. "It's exactly how this works," I replied. "I've been undercover in Adrian Drackel's organization. I have recordings, financial documents, witness statements. I can take down his entire network. But I'm only doing it if I walk away clean." He made calls. It took 3 days. But when he came back to me, the immunity agreement was solid. Everything I'd done, the recordings, the manipulation, the information gathering, all protected. As long as Adrian's crimes were worse than my methods, I was safe. Now I had 2 insurance policies, Adrian's fear of my recording and the federal government's need for his conviction. Inside Adrian's world, I was promoted. I became his enforcer, his strategist, his most trusted lieutenant. I attended meetings where major decisions were made. I learned that Adrian was planning to expand significantly, moving into human trafficking, increasing drug distribution, establishing connections with international cartels. He was getting bolder, greedier, more reckless. Perfect. I also learned that Julian was becoming a problem for Adrian. Julian had been stealing from the organization, skimming money for himself and Violet. Adrian was planning to handle it the way he handled all problems, with violence. That's when I made my move. I told Adrian that I discovered Julian's theft, that Julian was planning to testify against him to reduce his own sentence on a separate charge, that he was a liability that needed immediate removal. Adrian, already paranoid and aggressive, made the decision I'd predicted. He ordered Julian's death, but I didn't let that happen. Instead, I tipped off Detective Colin the morning it was supposed to occur. Julian was arrested before Adrian's men could reach him. The arrest was on multiple charges: the theft, involvement in money laundering, conspiracy with Adrian's organization. When Adrian found out, he was furious with me. He thought I'd betrayed him. "I didn't betray you," I explained calmly. "I prevented a worse problem. If Julian dies, Detective Colin investigates. Forensics, witnesses, questions nobody wants asked. If Julian gets arrested, he's in the system. He might think about cooperating with law enforcement to reduce his sentence. So I called in a favor with someone I know on the police force. They moved faster than Adrian's cleanup crew. Now Julian sits in a cell. No messy death scene. No investigation. Just a problem that disappeared into the criminal justice system. Adrian studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You think like I do," he said. "You understand that sometimes the clever solution is better than the violent one." He had no idea that I'd just orchestrated the beginning of his downfall. With Julian in custody, he'd either stay quiet and serve time, or he'd cooperate with prosecutors. Either way, the pressure was building inside Adrian's organization. His lieutenants were starting to wonder if they were next. The paranoia started spreading like an infection. 2 of Adrian's mid-level operators got arrested on drug charges. I'd arranged that with Detective Colin too. Another was found with a serious injury from a mugging. I'd made sure that happened to someone I knew Adrian suspected of betrayal. Each incident seemed random. Each one was carefully orchestrated. Meanwhile, I maintained perfect loyalty to Adrian. I advised him, comforted him, helped him navigate the chaos. I suggested that he cut loose certain people who were becoming liabilities. He took my advice. Those people ended up arrested or dead or disappeared, depending on what served my purposes best. And through it all, I was documenting everything. Every crime Adrian confessed to me. Every operation he described. Every contact he named. It was all going into my secure system, all being provided to the federal investigators on the side. The custody hearing was approaching. Violet's lawyer had built a strong case against me. Character witnesses, examples of my erratic behavior, documentation of my work with Adrian's organization. On paper, I looked like exactly what Adrian wanted me to be, a dangerous man unsuitable for parenting. But I was preparing for that too. I hired a lawyer, a good one. And I prepared to introduce evidence that Violet had deliberately brought a criminal into our family, had sold information to a cartel organization, had initiated an affair with one of Adrian's members, and had filed for custody specifically because Adrian had instructed her to do so. I had recordings of Adrian discussing this strategy with her. I had financial transfers showing he'd paid her to file the custody case. In the week before the hearing, something shifted inside me. I wasn't the man pretending to be a janitor anymore. I wasn't even the man pretending to be Adrian's loyal operative. I was becoming something else, something I hadn't been since I'd left the military. I was becoming the person I used to be, and everything was finally coming together. The courtroom was sterile and cold. Judge Margaret Chun, appointed just 18 months ago, known for her thorough examination of evidence, sat elevated behind the bench. Violet's lawyer, a sharp woman named Brooke, had prepared meticulously. She presented psychological evaluations claiming I was unstable. She called character witnesses, friends of Violet's who testified that they'd seen me behaving erratically. She emphasized my connection to Adrian's criminal organization as evidence that Harper was in immediate danger. Everything was designed to paint me as a threat. My lawyer, a retired federal prosecutor named Preston, sat calmly through all of it. He didn't object unnecessarily. He didn't interrupt. He just took notes and waited. Violet took the stand. She wore a light blue dress, the kind designed to appear vulnerable. She spoke softly about her fears, about how my military background had always worried her, about how I'd become withdrawn and dangerous since reconnecting with that lifestyle. She mentioned finding large sums of cash. She testified that I'd made veiled threats about taking Harper away from her permanently. It was carefully constructed fiction, but it sounded plausible. Then Preston stood up. "Ms. Violet," he began, not using her full name, a subtle psychological technique to create distance. "When did you first contact Mr. Adrian Drakel's organization?" Brooke objected immediately. "Your Honor, that's completely irrelevant to this custody proceeding." "It's directly relevant," Preston countered. Ms. Violet initiated this custody action under instruction from the defendant. She brought a known criminal into the family specifically to leverage against Mr. Mason. That speaks directly to her fitness as a parent. Judge Chen leaned forward. I'll allow it. But tread carefully, counselor. Violet's face went pale. Ms. Violet. Preston prompted. I'm not sure what you're referring to, she said weakly. Preston played the recording. Adrian's voice, crystal clear, instructing Violet to file for custody, instructing her on what to say, promising her money for her cooperation. The courtroom went silent. How did you obtain this? Judge Chen asked, her voice sharp. My client recorded it legally while conducting undercover operations with law enforcement authorization, Preston said, producing the immunity agreement. Mr. Mason has been cooperating with federal investigators regarding Mr. Drackle's criminal enterprise. This recording is part of an ongoing investigation. Brooke was on her feet, sputtering objections that didn't matter. The damage was done. Judge Chen's expression had shifted from neutral to intensely analytical. Preston then presented financial records showing that Adrian had transferred $50,000 to Violet's account in the week before she filed for custody. Money for compliance. Money for betrayal. Ms. Violet, Preston asked, were you aware that your lover, Julian Trenton, has been arrested on charges of conspiracy and money laundering? I want a lawyer, Violet said, her voice breaking. I think that's wise, Judge Chen said dryly. The hearing continued, but the momentum had completely reversed. My lawyer presented evidence that I'd been working with federal law enforcement. He introduced Detective Colin, who testified that I'd been instrumental in dismantling Adrian's operations. He showed the judge documentation proving that Harper was actually safer with me than with Violet, a woman who'd actively worked with criminals and compromised her own daughter's security to benefit a cartel organization. Brooke tried to fight back, but every counterargument crumbled under Preston's methodical presentation of facts. The turning point came when Harper's school counselor testified. She'd been asked by both sides to evaluate Harper's emotional state and her relationship with each parent. The counselor explained that Harper had mentioned overhearing conversations between her mother and Julian. Conversations about money, about keeping secrets, about her father being dangerous, a narrative that had clearly been coached. In my professional assessment, the counselor said, Harper is more emotionally secure with her father. She feels safe with him. When she speaks about him, even acknowledging his recent work stress, she expresses genuine love and attachment. With her mother, she expresses confusion and anxiety. By the end of the hearing, Judge Chun was no longer asking questions. She was making observations. This court finds that while Mr. Mason's employment situation is unconventional, it does not constitute a danger to the minor child. In fact, the evidence suggests that the mother deliberately involved a criminal organization in family matters as leverage in a custody dispute. This is exactly the kind of parental judgment that puts a child at risk. She paused, looking directly at Violet. Furthermore, the court finds that Mr. Mason has demonstrated cooperation with law enforcement and active efforts to disengage from the criminal organization that Ms. Violet deliberately introduced into the family. Given the circumstances, the court awards primary custody of Harper to Mr. Mason, effective immediately. Ms. Violet will have supervised visitation pending further evaluation. The gavel came down. Violet didn't cry in the courtroom. She just sat there, understanding exactly what she'd lost. Everything she'd gambled on Adrian's promises, on betraying me, on using Harper as leverage, had collapsed in a single afternoon. As I was leaving the courthouse, Detective Colin pulled me aside. Adrian knows something happened, he said quietly. He's getting nervous. He's talking about disappearing, liquidating assets, making moves that are getting messy. He's also suspicious that you've been working against him. Good, I said. Let him move. Every move he makes, every asset he liquidates, every person he contacts, it's all going into the record. We let him run. That's when he makes mistakes. That night, Harper came home with me. She was quiet in the car, processing everything. When we got to the house, she sat on the couch and looked at me seriously. "Mom lied about you," she said. "Yes," I said. No point in protecting her from the truth anymore. She made some really bad decisions. Decisions that put both of us in danger. "Are you going to hurt her?" I knelt down so I was at her eye level. "No. I'm going to make sure people understand what she did, and then the law will handle the rest. I'm going to keep you safe. That's all I've ever wanted to do." She nodded slowly and leaned against me. But in my mind, I was already thinking about Adrian, about how his organization was deteriorating, about how his paranoia was escalating, about how the next move would finally push him over the edge, the moment where he'd become so desperate, so terrified, that he'd do something stupid, something that would be impossible to hide from law enforcement, something that would guarantee his destruction. Adrian was falling apart. I could see it in the way he moved, more aggressive, less calculated. The careful businessman had transformed into a cornered animal. He'd started moving his money, liquidating assets, making deals with people he'd normally never trust. Every decision was being driven by panic, and I was documenting all of it. Over the next 2 weeks, I gathered the final pieces of evidence that would destroy him completely. I had recordings of him ordering violence. I had financial documents tracing $50 million through shell corporations. I had the names of every person he'd paid off, police captains, judges, politicians. I had documentation of his connection to international drug cartels and human trafficking operations. But I needed one more thing: proof of direct involvement in a serious crime. Something that couldn't be explained away as circumstantial evidence. Something that would guarantee conviction. The opportunity came when Adrian decided to move a shipment of product through the city. 50 kilos of cocaine, destined for distribution across the Midwest. It was the biggest move he'd made in months, and he wanted to oversee it personally. I told him I'd handle the logistics, that I'd ensure nothing went wrong. What Adrian didn't know was that I'd already contacted Detective Colin. What he didn't know was that law enforcement would be tracking every step of that shipment. But they wouldn't move in until Adrian physically took possession, until his hands were directly on the drugs, until there was no ambiguity about his involvement. I orchestrated the timeline carefully. Adrian arrived at the distribution warehouse at midnight. He wanted to see the product, verify quality, confirm the shipment was legitimate. He brought 2 bodyguards. He brought Julian's replacement, a newer lieutenant named Blake, who hadn't figured out yet that Adrian's organization was imploding. I watched from a distance as Adrian opened the first brick, examined it, nodded his approval. That's when law enforcement moved in. It happened fast. Unmarked vehicles surrounded the warehouse. Armed agents positioned at every exit. The takedown was coordinated perfectly. Adrian didn't even have time to reach for a weapon before he was on the ground, handcuffed, read his rights. I stood outside the perimeter, watching as they searched the warehouse. Every brick of cocaine bagged and cataloged. Every financial record seized. Adrian's 2 bodyguards surrendered immediately. Blake tried to run. He made it approximately 50 feet before being tackled. Detective Colin approached me as Adrian was being loaded into a federal vehicle. Adrian's eyes found me across the parking lot. The moment he understood. The moment it all clicked into place. The look on his face, that shift from terror to absolute realization, was worth everything I'd sacrificed. "You set me up from the beginning," he said, the words carrying across the distance even though his hands were restrained. "Yes," I called back. "My wife is cooperating with prosecutors. Julian's testimony about your operations has already been recorded. Your financial advisor in Miami has already agreed to turn state's evidence in exchange for immunity. Your network is dismantled." Adrian tried to lunge forward, but the officers held him firm. He was screaming now, promises of what he'd do to me, to Harper, to everyone I'd ever cared about. The rage of a man who'd finally understood that he'd been played by someone smarter than he was. They loaded him into the vehicle and drove away. That was clean, Detective Collins said. You gave us everything we needed. I gave you nothing that would implicate me. I corrected. My immunity covers my actions. The recordings I made were done legally under federal authorization. The financial documents came from multiple independent sources that have nothing to do with me. Julian, his accountant, his security chief, they're all cooperating because of your investigation, not because of anything I did. Technically speaking, you're right, Collins said. But everyone involved knows what you did here. I was a janitor pushed into a corner by a criminal organization, I said. I did what I had to do to protect my daughter. If that crosses legal lines, I have immunity. If it doesn't, it's just a man fighting back against the people who tried to destroy his life. Collins smiled slightly. That's a good story. It's the true story, I said. Over the next month, the federal case against Adrian grew stronger. Julian testified about operations, about money laundering, about connections to international cartels. The accountant provided detailed financial records that showed billions of dollars flowing through the system. The security chief described specific incidents of violence and intimidation. Adrian's lawyers argued that the evidence had been obtained improperly, that I'd acted as an unlicensed federal agent, that my testimony should be excluded. But the immunity agreement was airtight. And more importantly, there was so much corroborating evidence from other sources that even without my direct involvement, the case was overwhelming. Violet's situation was more complicated. She'd cooperated with authorities regarding her involvement with Adrian and Julian. She'd testified about the affairs, about Adrian's instructions to file for custody, about the money she'd accepted. In exchange, prosecutors had agreed not to charge her with conspiracy, though she faced charges on money laundering and fraud. Her lawyer negotiated a plea deal: 3 years in minimum security, probation upon release, and forfeiture of significant assets. It was lenient because she'd cooperated. It was also justice served through the legal system rather than through violence. On the day Adrian was formally indicted, I picked Harper up from school early. We drove to a park and sat on a bench overlooking the water. It's over, I told her. The people who tried to hurt us are facing consequences. You're safe now. We're both safe. She didn't fully understand. She was 8, and adult complications existed somewhere beyond her comprehension. But she understood the essential truth. Her father had protected her. Her father had found a way to make things right without destroying himself in the process. That was enough. 2 months after Adrian's arrest, I received a message from him. It came through his lawyer, a formal letter requesting a meeting at the federal detention center where he was being held awaiting trial. The letter was simple. I want to understand how you did this. Meet with me once. I almost didn't go. There was no strategic advantage, no intelligence to gather, no information I needed from him. But there was something else, a need for closure, I suppose. Or maybe just the need to look him in the eye one final time and let him see exactly what he'd been dealing with. The detention center visiting room was divided by thick glass. Adrian sat on one side, wearing a federal detention jumpsuit, looking diminished in a way that had nothing to do with his physical appearance. He'd lost weight. His hair had gone whiter. His eyes had the look of someone whose world had completely inverted. I picked up the phone. "Hello, Adrian," I said. I've replayed every conversation in my head. He started immediately. No greeting, no preamble. Every decision I made with you. Every moment I thought I was reading you correctly. And I can't find the moment where I should have known. Because there wasn't one, I said. That's what made it work. I didn't betray you at a specific moment. I infiltrated you from the beginning. Every conversation, every action, every piece of advice I gave you. It was all designed to move you in a direction that would ultimately destroy you. But why? Adrian asked, and there was genuine confusion in his voice. You had money. You had power. You could have stayed. You could have actually become what I thought you were. Because I don't want that life, I said. I left that life a long time ago. And then you and your organization pushed me back into it. You threatened my daughter. You threatened my freedom. You used people I cared about as leverage. You left me no choice. Adrian leaned back in his chair. Your wife. My wife is facing sentencing next month. She'll spend 3 years in prison. After that, she'll have a felony record. She'll be registered as part of a money laundering conspiracy, and she'll likely never see Harper in an unsupervised setting again. That's her consequence. And Julian? Julian is looking at 8 to 10 years. He's cooperating with prosecutors, but his role was too direct. He knew what he was involved with. Adrian nodded slowly, understanding the architecture of what I'd built. You didn't just come after me. You disassembled everything. The operations in Miami, destroyed. The Chicago warehouse, shut down, evidence seized. The connections to the Sinaloa cartel, exposed to other organizations, which made those cartels extremely interested in distancing themselves from me. Yes, I confirmed. Your immunity agreement protects you from everything. Completely, I said. I can't be charged with anything I did in service of the undercover operation. The recordings, the manipulation, even technically the fraud I committed in Adrian's system, all covered. Adrian laughed, a bitter sound. I brought you in because I thought you were dangerous. Because I thought you were someone who understood violence and power. And you were dangerous. Just not in the way I anticipated. I'm dangerous because I understand something you never did, I said. Quiet revenge is more devastating than loud revenge. Taking someone down through the legal system, through documentation, through evidence, it's perfect. It's irreversible. And it's completely clean. So what now? Adrian asked. You go back to being a janitor? No, I said. I'm leaving that city. I'm taking Harper somewhere she can have a normal life. Somewhere she can go to school without the shadow of her mother's crimes or her father's past following her. I'm going to build something real. Something honest. That's not who you are, Adrian said. You're right, I replied. But it's who I want to be. And I've earned the right to choose that. Adrian studied me through the glass. You know what the worst part of this is? If you'd actually joined my organization completely, if you'd actually become the person I wanted you to be, you probably would have been the most successful lieutenant I ever had. You're brilliant at strategy. You understand how systems work. You know how to move without leaving a trace. I know, I said. That's why I had to stop you before you consumed me completely. There was a long silence between us. The trial starts in 6 weeks, Adrian finally said. My lawyers say I'll probably get 25 to life, given the breadth of charges. Money laundering, drug trafficking, conspiracy, human trafficking connections. Even with the best legal team, the evidence is overwhelming. Yes, I said. I have one question, Adrian continued. The moment you recorded me at the warehouse, the moment you pulled out that phone, did you know you were going to do that? Or was it improvisation? I thought back to that moment. Adrian standing over Dominic, believing I was finally going to become his instrument, finally crossed the line into complete moral compromise. I knew I had to get insurance, I said. I didn't know exactly how until you handed me the moment. You wanted to lock me into your world. You were trying to ensure I could never leave. So I took control of that moment. I made it clear that I would never be locked into anything, that I was always going to be the one with leverage. That's when I lost, Adrian said quietly. That's when you lost, I confirmed. I stood up to leave. Wait, Adrian said. One more thing. Your daughter, Harper. What will you tell her about all this? About what you did? About who I was? About her mother? I looked at him through the glass. I'll tell her the truth. That people make terrible choices. That those choices have consequences. And that the most important thing is choosing to be better. I'll tell her that her mother made mistakes, but she's still her mother. That her father fought back against people who tried to destroy him. And that love, real love, means protecting people even when it costs you everything. Adrian nodded slowly. That's a better answer than I deserve. I hung up the phone and walked out of the detention center. Behind me, Adrian sat in the visiting room with the phone still in his hand, finally understanding the full scope of his defeat. It wasn't the kind of understanding that came from physical destruction. It was the kind that came from realizing that he'd been outmaneuvered by someone smarter, more patient, and more willing to play the long game. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. The last piece of the old Mason, the operative, the dangerous man, the person trained to break systems and people, finally released its grip. I was becoming something different now, something better. The federal courthouse was packed the morning Adrian's trial began. Media outlets had picked up the story. A major cartel operation dismantled, billions in criminal activity exposed, connections to international trafficking networks. The public gallery was filled with journalists, curious spectators, and law enforcement officials from agencies that Adrian had affected across multiple states. Judge Samuel Mitchell, a federal judge known for his thorough examination of evidence and his zero tolerance for corruption, presided. He was in his 60s, with gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He'd read the entire case file. He understood the complexity and the scope of what was being presented. The prosecution opened with a clear narrative. Adrian Drackle was a criminal entrepreneur who'd built a sophisticated network for money laundering, drug distribution, and human trafficking. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, testimony from cooperating witnesses, seized communications, physical evidence, and at the center of it all, the testimony of a courageous informant who'd risked his life to dismantle the organization from within. I testified for 3 days. My lawyer had prepared me carefully. The prosecution asked questions designed to establish Adrian's culpability. The defense attorney, a sharp woman named Tessa, tried to undermine my credibility, to suggest that I'd manipulated evidence, that I had a personal vendetta against Adrian, that my immunity agreement created a perverse incentive for me to fabricate incriminating information. Mr. Mason, she asked during cross-examination, isn't it true that you have a financial interest in Mr. Drackle's conviction? That without his downfall, your immunity might be questioned? My immunity is absolute, I replied. It was granted before I gathered any evidence. My credibility doesn't depend on Adrian's conviction. The evidence speaks for itself. But you've admitted to making recordings without consent in some cases, to manipulating situations to create criminal opportunities, to working with law enforcement in ways that pushed the legal boundaries. All covered by my immunity agreement, I said calmly, and all documented and approved by federal prosecutors before the actions occurred. Judge Mitchell intervened. Counsel, we've already established the validity of the immunity agreement. The witness's credibility stands or falls based on the consistency of his testimony against corroborating evidence, not on questions about his legal status. The defense strategy was failing because the evidence was simply too overwhelming. For every piece of my testimony, there were 3 pieces of corroborating evidence that had nothing to do with me. Julian's testimony about the operations, financial records from multiple independent sources, communications intercepts, physical surveillance data. Adrian's accountant testified about moving billions through shell corporations. His security chief described specific incidents of violence and intimidation. An FBI financial crimes specialist explained the sophisticated money laundering techniques that Adrian's organization had used. The weakest moment came when Violet testified. She was required to appear. Her cooperation agreement mandated it. She sat in the witness box looking diminished, older than I'd remembered her. The prosecution asked her to detail her relationship with Adrian, with Julian, her role in recruiting me into the organization. Her voice was steady as she described how Adrian had approached her, how he'd promised her money and a better life if she would gather information about my background, how she'd been told to file for custody as a way to control me, to force me to comply with Adrian's demands. Did Mr. Drackle ever threaten you? The prosecutor asked. Yes, she said quietly. He said if I didn't do exactly what he asked, he would ensure I lost Harper permanently. He said he had connections to judges, to social services, that he could destroy me if I betrayed him. And you believed him? Yes. The defense tried to mitigate her culpability by suggesting Adrian had coerced her, that she was a victim of his manipulation. But the recordings told a different story. Recordings of her laughing with Adrian about my ignorance. Recordings of her discussing payment for her role in the conspiracy. Recordings of her actively planning how to manipulate Harper to testify against me. When she stepped down from the witness stand, she looked at me, just for a moment. Her eyes carried no apology, no recognition of what she'd done. They carried only the understanding that her life, as she'd known it, was over. The trial lasted 4 weeks. The defense presented their case, arguing that Adrian had been manipulated by me, that the evidence was circumstantial, that the immunity agreement created a false narrative where I could claim anything without consequence. But Judge Mitchell was unmoved. The evidence presented by the prosecution is substantial, corroborated, and internally consistent, he said during his summary to the jury. The defense has presented speculation, but no credible contradictory evidence. The witness's immunity agreement actually strengthens his credibility. If he were fabricating information, the defense could use that immunity status against him. The fact that his testimony aligns with independent evidence suggests truthfulness rather than manipulation. The jury deliberated for 6 days. When they returned, the verdict was guilty on all counts: money laundering, drug trafficking, conspiracy, human trafficking connections, corruption of public officials. 47 separate charges, and Adrian was convicted on 43 of them. The sentencing hearing occurred 3 weeks later. Adrian stood before Judge Mitchell in his federal detention clothes. The judge had read victim impact statements from people whose lives had been destroyed by Adrian's operations. Families torn apart by drug addiction. Women rescued from trafficking networks. Communities damaged by the flow of narcotics through their streets. Judge Mitchell looked at Adrian with something approaching disgust. "Mr. Drackle, you built a sophisticated criminal enterprise that caused documented harm to hundreds of individuals. You corrupted public officials. You trafficked in human suffering. You believed yourself above the law. The court finds that such egregious conduct demands the maximum available sentence." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "You are sentenced to 30 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole before serving a minimum of 25 years. You will forfeit all assets determined to be proceeds of criminal activity. You are ordered to pay restitution to victims in an amount to be determined by the court." Adrian didn't react. He just stood there, accepting the sentence the way a man accepts his inevitable death. Within a week, Julian received his sentence, 10 years. Violet received her sentence, 3 years, with a strong recommendation from prosecutors that she be placed in minimum security. The organization itself was dismantled. Safe houses seized. Bank accounts frozen. International connections exposed, which led to arrests in 3 other countries. The network Adrian had spent years building was completely destroyed in a matter of months. But the most important consequence, at least to me, came 6 weeks after the trial ended. I received a formal notification from the court that my custody status was final. Harper was officially in my permanent legal custody. Violet's visitation rights would be supervised pending her release from prison, and any visitation would require a formal court order renewal every 2 years. Harper was safe. She was legally, permanently, completely mine to protect. I held that document in my hands and realized that all the manipulation, all the danger, all the years of playing a character had led to this single moment. Not revenge, not violence, not destruction for its own sake. Justice. Real, legal, documented justice. And my daughter's future secured. 3 years later, I stood in the kitchen of a small house in Portland, Oregon, watching Harper make pancakes. She was 11 now, tall, confident, with her mother's laugh but her father's careful eyes. The kind of eyes that noticed when people weren't being honest. We'd left the city 6 months after Adrian's sentencing. I'd taken a job as a security consultant for legitimate businesses. Work that was honest, that paid well, that didn't require me to pretend or manipulate. Harper had settled into a good school. She had friends. She had a life that felt real. The house was modest but solid. Nothing fancy. Just a place where we could exist without looking over our shoulders, without waiting for the past to catch up with us. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Harper said, flipping a pancake with surprising skill for an 11-year-old. "Always," I said. "Do you ever regret it? Everything you did to Adrian? Sometimes you look sad about it." I considered lying, considered giving her the easy answer. But I'd promised to be honest with her about complicated things. "I regret that it was necessary," I said. "I regret that your mother made choices that forced me to become someone I didn't want to be. But do I regret taking Adrian down? No, because if I hadn't, we wouldn't be safe. You wouldn't have the life you have now." "Mom writes me letters," Harper said quietly. "From prison. She says she's sorry, that she made terrible mistakes." "That's good," I said. "She did make terrible mistakes. But she's also your mother. And someday, when you're older, you can decide what that means for you." Harper nodded thoughtfully. She was wise beyond her years in a way that broke my heart a little. No child should have to process this much complexity. But she had survived it. We both had. My phone buzzed. A message from Detective Colin. "Adrian transferred to general population yesterday. Word is he's having a hard time. Other inmates know who he is." I didn't respond. Adrian's fate in prison was his own. I wasn't going to chase him there. I wasn't going to feed the darkness that might still exist inside me. I was going to finish making pancakes with my daughter and let the past stay where it belonged. Later that evening, after Harper was asleep, I sat in my home office and opened my secure system for the last time. I reviewed all the documentation from the Adrian case. Every recording, every financial record, every piece of evidence. Then I deleted it all. Permanently. No backups. No insurance policies hidden away for future leverage. I was done being a person who kept ammunition for wars that were already over. The only thing I kept was a single photograph. Harper at the courthouse on the day Adrian was sentenced, holding my hand, looking up at the judge with the expression of a child who finally understood that the world was going to be okay. 4 months later, I received a notification that Violet had been released from prison on time, served with probation. She contacted me through her parole officer requesting supervised visitation with Harper. It took 3 months of careful arrangement, but eventually, I facilitated a meeting in a neutral location, a coffee shop with a court-appointed supervisor present. Harper was nervous. I could tell by the way she held her coffee cup, by the small fidgeting movements she made when she thought no one was watching. Violet looked different. Prison had changed her, not just physically, though she'd aged noticeably, but in some deeper way. There was a humility in her posture that hadn't existed before. Or maybe it was just the weight of consequences finally landing on her shoulders. They talked for an hour. Nothing profound. Violet asked about school, about Harper's friends, about what she was reading. Harper answered in measured responses, maintaining distance even as she sat across the table from her mother. When it ended, Violet looked at me. "Thank you," she said simply, "for letting her see me, for not keeping her from me completely." "I did it for her," I said. "Not for you. But you're right to be grateful, because I could have made a different choice." Violet nodded. She understood that mercy, in this case, was something I was choosing to extend rather than something she'd earned. She rebuilt her life slowly, got a job at a nonprofit that helped formerly incarcerated people reintegrate into society, moved into a small apartment, attended therapy, worked toward being someone her daughter could eventually respect, if not forgive completely. It took 2 years, but eventually Harper agreed to unsupervised visits with her mother. Not every week, not even every month, but enough that they could begin rebuilding something resembling a relationship. Not the one they'd had before, but something new. Something based on reality rather than illusion. 18 months after Adrian's arrest, I received news that Adrian had been attacked in prison by another inmate. Nothing fatal, just serious enough to put him in the hospital wing for several weeks. The attack was retaliation from someone whose family had been destroyed by Adrian's drug operation. I didn't feel satisfaction about it. I just acknowledged that the world sometimes delivers its own justice, outside courtrooms and legal systems. Adrian survived. He spent the rest of his sentence in protective custody, locked away alone, isolated from the general population, experiencing the kind of slow psychological deterioration that comes from years of solitude. It was, I supposed, a kind of quiet revenge that he was serving on himself. Present day, 5 years after the beginning, Harper is 16 now. She's applying to universities, thinking about what she wants to become. She mentions psychology sometimes, the study of why people make the choices they do. I suspect she's trying to understand her mother, to understand me, to understand the fundamental question of human nature that defined our family's chaos. I've built a legitimate career. I consult on security matters for corporations and nonprofit organizations. The work is honest. The pay is good. The hours are reasonable. I have a life that doesn't require me to be someone I'm not. I still wake up some mornings with the old instincts, the awareness of exits, the assessment of threats, the calculation of tactical advantages. Those things don't fully leave a person, but they're quieter now. They're in the background rather than at the forefront of everything I do. Last week, I ran into Judge Mitchell at a coffee shop. He recognized me and stopped to talk. "That case changed my career trajectory," he said. "I've never seen such a comprehensive dismantling of a criminal organization. You did something remarkable there." "I did what needed to be done," I said. "Most people wouldn't have had the discipline," he replied. "Most people would have wanted revenge. Blood. Justice through violence. You chose a path that was harder, slower, but ultimately more complete." After he left, I thought about that distinction. Revenge versus justice. They're not the same thing, though people often confuse them. Revenge is about making someone suffer the way you suffered. Justice is about establishing accountability and preventing future harm. I'd chosen justice, and in choosing it, I'd become someone I could live with. If you're still watching this story,